People should be able to get any kind of degree that they want and have the opportunity to get a degree. Yes, to a certain extent, if they're able, once they get that degree, to actually shoulder the cost that it took to get that degree. It's like giving a loan for a jumbo house to somebody that you know can't pay it back.
Yeah,
that's predatory.
It is, yeah.
And so our student loan system is predatory.
Yeah, I mean, at a certain point, though, I will go back to the individual choice. Is that some students just eventually got to realize, like, man, I really need to work a lot harder somehow to get into an engineering class or two, instead of taking a freaking, like, the life and times of said agricultural plant in fucking Virginia Beach.
Yeah, that nobody cares.
That nobody cares. You know what I mean?
Nobody's going to pay you $1 for it.
Nobody's going to pay you a damn dollar for it.
Yeah.
I mean, if people really, and students especially, realize that, but the problem is that, like, they're being fed so much bullshit from these universities that they really do think that they're just going to leave and they're going to get hired left and right. There are going to be offers for them left and right, and it's just going to be like an easy ride after that.
Right,
like,
because they're being fed the myth of do what you love instead of do what you're good at, that you can do, that everybody wants, that nobody wants to do for themselves. Right?
Yeah.
That's where you want to be. You want to be in an area where there's no competition, you are the best at it, and that you're actually good at it. And by the way, by and large, for most professions, you'll end up actually probably liking it if you're that good.
Yeah. I mean, if you're good at it, you're going to make money. And either way, as long as you're making money and, like, saving the money at the end of the day and being able to pay off your bills and whatnot,
you can transition to something else.
I mean, there's very few worse positions to be in than to be, like, financially burdened, especially by student debts. I mean, what's the number at now? It's like, what, 1.4 trillion?
Yeah, it's pretty high.
Dude, that's astronomically high. Like, I don't see no way that, like, half the graduates in this country can even pay those numbers back. I mean, the other half maybe if they really hustle for it.
Yeah.
But, like,
it's a form of financial slavery for sure.
Yeah. I mean, it makes me weird, like, seeing people graduate and then all of a sudden, like, think of themselves like, I have to become an activist now because we were all done. And we got fed lies by mysterious financial institutions that we were going to get these jobs and we're not getting them now. I mean, like, what do you even do about that? Like, about these so-called, like, education activists that want to call it free education. What do you do? You make it free, like, everybody's going to start going, and eventually, like, you just water down the competition even more.
Right.
You know, if everybody got degrees, nobody's really marketable at that point. The whole point of getting a degree was to, like, stand out from the crowd and get paid a little bit more. But if everybody gets degrees because education's free, nobody's really going to be, like, standing out, and you're not going to get hired.
Yeah, one solution is basically to make these loans, especially loans that are considered predatory.
Yeah.
And you can create criteria for that. Make those dischargeable.
Yeah.
And then make sure that future loans are not awarded or given without precisely that economic analysis of likelihood of being able to shoulder that cost in that profession.
Yeah, I mean, the other problem is that the universities themselves, from, like, a top and, like, middle level and on down to the students, that they've basically turned into, like, activist organizations as well. I mean, it's pretty clear. Everybody knows that, like, what direction most colleges and universities lean. Everybody knows it.
Yes.
But it's like when they're thinking of themselves as activist organizations, and, you know, you're going to have somebody like me just say, like, no, I need an education. I'm paying this much money. I don't want to be told stuff and then be mad about it later at some person I've never met in my life, probably will never meet. The universities are, like, notorious for this, and most people probably don't know is that, you know, you get to college and it's like all of a sudden, like, as Thomas Sowell once said, like, the more in one direction that universities and colleges lean, you tend to see students separated by groups versus the other direction where you'll see students just mingle freely amongst each other.
Where they have the free exchange of ideas and have some semblance of tolerance for
anybody else,
extraneous ideas or non-standard ideas.
Yeah.
Which gives you that opportunity for evolution again, right? And we're coming back to not being treated as a group, but treated as an individual.
Yeah.
Right?
And when these graduates leave, and especially like the so-called journalism majors, when they leave and then get a job at, the usual suspects, New York Times, Washington Post, all of them, they think everything is just grouped together all over. And it's like, no, like when you get out to the real world, people just make transactions with whomever they want, whenever they want, in any type of way they want.
Sometimes randomly.
And when people like that graduate and get these jobs, they all of a sudden anoint themselves almost back to what you said, to politician-like thoughts of thinking, I need to put these articles out there to get my ideas out there. And it was always assumed that people, like graduates, would get out into the real world. They would all of a sudden like start to revert back to normalcy, like in their mind, and think not everything is that bad. My situation could be better, but it's really not that bad. They're just not doing it. They're not going that way. And we're starting to see it now, like in the media, of course, but like even outside of like technology, you walk around and like you see the political stickers everywhere, and people wear them like a badge of honor almost. And I'm not like optimistic about the future of education in America. I'm just not.
Well, maybe technology is the answer,
I mean, in one sense, I hope not. In another sense, I do. But it's like when you have like the major power players controlling the flow of information, I mean, at some point, somebody's got to say, like, man, this just can't strictly be like this. Like
are you talking about data hoarding? Is that what you're talking about? Where the large technology providers, social media, search engines, and so on, hoard information, treasure troves of information on individuals? Is that what we're talking about?
And like basically crafting a whole narrative around things to get people to go in one direction.
Right. Well, there are several models that are competing models that are out there. The American model is that the companies own all that information, and oftentimes they know more about the individual than the individual knows about themselves.
Yeah.
And it's happened, actually.
It's pretty scary.
It's pretty scary, but for example, in Europe right now, they're considering a different model where the technology players, the technology players don't own that information. That information is actually stored by the state, and so all
that's just as scary too, in one sense.
Well, it's scary in a different way.
Yeah.
Right. What if the state is no longer so benevolent?
Yeah.
Right? But essentially, what they're doing is that they're putting into place an infrastructure for centralized concentration of that information. That individual companies can collect that information, but they have to actually send it and store it, and they don't own it. And the individual supposedly owns it,
but
the government has custody of it, or at least the quasi-government entity that's meant to equalize everything for all the different technology players.
Yeah.
Actually has custody of it. It's a different way of seeing things.
Yeah, it's a different way of seeing things. And the problem is that like when you have one of these like politicians in Europe just all of a sudden anoint themselves to that level of thinking, I simply know what's best just because of this position that I'm in.
Yep.
I mean, in one sense, I don't blame them because it's like they have a job to hold, and maybe because they have to pretend to be certain in order to gain support for that.
Yeah.
But like somebody's got to stop and say, you know what, like.
But the good news is that assuming that the government doesn't go crazy, or assuming that for the U.S. that these companies see that they're going to actually end up squelching the goose that laid the golden egg if they squelch all individualism out of society.
Yeah.
If they do see this, technology does remain an answer to our education problem, honestly. Why? Because Thomas Friedman, for example, wrote this book, I think it's 2004, maybe 3, The World is Flat. And he talked about how kids in India now, because thanks to the internet and thanks to technology, now have access to the same exact education sitting in Hyderabad as some guy sitting in Lexington, Kentucky.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, technology becomes this enabler for delivery of education, where a lot of these institutions lose a lot of their current inherent power because of, regionalization,
Yeah.
Because of, their brand name. The brand name starts to not matter anymore.
Yeah.
Or at least much less, right? The kid can actually go and get a autonomous driving or image processing course from MIT courseware, like that.
And then get a job at Tesla.
Get it for free in many cases. Or he can go to Cal Poly and get access to their courses, probably for a small fee.
Yeah.
But my point is that the technology has become this great equalizer. And what's amazing is that in the history of man, most technologies are double-edged, in that they have this tremendous possibility for great good, but also this possibility for evil.
Yeah.
You think of nuclear fission, the nuclear bomb, but you also have nuclear power, which may, in some ways, if implemented properly, without dual-use technologies, may actually solve our environmental problem for generating clean energy.
Well, yeah, because you won't have solar panels and wind turbines everywhere.
Most of all, you won't have greenhouse gases, and as long as you know how to recycle fissile material, you're golden.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So you think of these dual use technologies, and fortunately, in the great history of man has always chosen to use the good side of technology.
Yeah.
And so you have things
until recently.
Well, even recently. I mean, there's been an explosion. There's been a huge explosion in the use of technology, and overwhelmingly, the record shows that we always choose
the upward trajectory.
Yeah. Now, there have been cases where we haven't, right? And we've paid for it.
Yeah.
Atmospheric testing of nuclear bombs, for example, caused the strontium problem that Linus Pauling talked about, which was essentially the pollution of bones, instead of having calcium being put in bones, the decaying strontium was being put in bones, and the strontium would decay as it was replacing because of the atmospheric fallout of nuclear stuff. But the point is,
I think that's one of those things that whoever's going to listen to this wishes they didn't hear about.
Right. Well, he solved the problem. Linus Pauling essentially became a crusader and solved the problem. And today there is no atmospheric testing of nuclear bombs. It's always
that's good.
It's always underground because of him, because he found this problem, right? And but initially we didn't take the high road on it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But my point is that this technology, what it's doing is that for example, you think of the development of autonomous driving. It's solving a lot of it's going to solve a lot of problems.
Yeah.
But it also has the opportunity to be a power grab. The day that you no longer are allowed to drive your own car and that you must use autonomous driving technology to go somewhere, it opens the abuse, for example, for the government saying, no, you can't go to the stadium on Fridays.
Yeah.
And they won't, and the car will not go there.
You and I have talked about that privately before, and that's just like an incredibly
It's scary.
It's
scary, but guess what? I predict that with very few exceptions, that will never happen. The government has no, and us as a society have no interest in telling you, Lance, that no, you can't go to the stadium on Fridays. It's just not going to happen. Right?
Yeah. I mean, one thing I don't like in terms of like the cultural aspect that technology has had is like basically made most people hysterical armchair activists.
Interesting concept. Can you develop that further?
I mean, you go on Facebook. Well, I don't have Facebook anymore. I got rid of it. I couldn't stand to see people typing in all caps about all kinds of stuff about social justice initiatives. And I'm like, man, like for one, like you're not even making any type of legible sense. You're just venting basically on your keyboard, all the while thinking you're actually like helping yourself out by venting on there. All you're doing is just turning yourself into like a digital Incredible Hulk, because you're just going to get more pissed off the more you see stuff on the internet. You're essentially feeding yourself the same fuel to the fire you're trying to extinguish by just venting on Facebook or Instagram, whatever.